You owe me for this, Kage Shinma. No, I'm not happy about this. The stupid this time burns so much I would have had been safer on Beetlejuice. What? We're on? You're supposed to tell me this shit. Ahem. Greetings, YouTube, and welcome to the first in a series of looks into creationists demolishing their own arguments, usually by the invocation of a magic sky fairy. On the menu for this week is a man many skeptics know well for the flatulent nature of his verbal excretions, Ian Joby. Like Teehee, I'm having trouble referring to him as Mr. Joby or Ian, and I'm not about to call him by his urinary-sounding YouTube moniker, Wazoalu. Therefore, in a nod to this week's shout-out, the living dinosaur, Ian, you will hereafter be known as Booby. Today, we're going to have a look at Genesis Week Season 2, Episode 23, Our Young Solar System. It's nearly half an hour, and more than mildly painful. I nearly decided to eschew this one in favor of a particularly stunning piece of filth posted by Eric Hovind, but most of the real grime was regurgitated by the man he interviewed, rather than his own ridiculous conjectures. So, for the 3 people that will bother to watch this far in, his turn's coming. For the purposes of brevity, I've cut out the spiel at the very beginning, as this is strictly scripted and appears nearly unchanged at the front end of all his videos.
I'm your host, Ian J.
Hello, Booby. What kind of drivel did they serve you for lunch today? I hope you went against form and ate light. If you make a mess on my floor whilst I'm ramming your verbal effluence back through your ring piece, I will have to be cross.
For decades, multiple creationists have pointed out the insurmountable problems for stellar evolution and deep time caused by the need for a naturalistic origin of our solar system. Now, there are numerous features within our solar system that defy all evolutionary models and even point to our solar system being young instead of many billions of years old.
You're not off to a good start today, are you, Booby? 30 seconds in, and you've already belched your first malodorous pack of falsehoods. Stellar evolution is not, has not, nor will ever be evolution. You're talking about cosmology, not evolution, and there is no evolutionary model that has anything to say about cosmology. Evolution is about biodiversity, and nothing else. It has nothing to say about any god, let alone yours, or any other physical process. Just the variation of allele frequency in populations over time.
For example, physicist Wayne Spencer had been pointing out the problems that Jupiter's moon Io presents to deep time because of the ridiculous amount of heat the moon is pumping out.
Io produces heat because the gravity of Jupiter and the other Jovian satellites keeps needing it. All the friction that comes from it being pulled in several different directions at once prevents Io from cooling in any appreciable way, resulting in extreme volcanism to try and be something other than an amorphous mass of molten material. Mr. Spencer is not possessed of a PhD in astronomy or cosmology, but instead has a Master's of Science in Physics. He's spent all of the last 18 years as a tech support and QA tester after a grand total of 9 years teaching more basic math and sciences, mostly at the high school level, and for private Christian institutions. I'll leave a link to his CV in the description.
Now, obviously, an object can only put out heat for so long before it cools down. So therefore, the moon cannot be billions of years old.
Yes, it can. And I told you how nor even 15 seconds ago. You try and keep up.
Spencer had been pointing this out for decades and published the math on it in his 2003 YECcy paper, which you can read here.
I had never heard of the YECcy prior to this, and I actually had to use your web link to get the paper to find out what the YECcy even is. The International Conference on Creationism isn't nearly the same as a peer-reviewed journal, nor a scientific conference.
Retired Sandia National Labs physicist, Dr. Russell Humphreys, went a step farther than just pointing at the problems for evolutionary interpretations.
He did? That would be a first.
Humphreys took one of the most powerful steps you can take in science. He made predictions based on the biblical creation model for the magnetic fields of planets.
Predictions? On a biblical creation model? Which model? And what are they?
Now, predictive power is one of the strongest tests of any scientific model.
Yes it is. In fact, it's a requirement to even be a scientific model.
Evolutionary models make multiple predictions about planetary magnetic fields.
There's that canard about evolutionary models. Evolution is about the diversity of life, and has nothing to say about magnetic fields. Ever.
So Humphreys asked the question, if creation were true, what would the evidence be?
That's presuppositionalism, and thus is invalid on its face. You don't take your conclusion and go hunting for the evidence, Booby. That's what creationists. Oh, right. Carry on then.
He then proposed a model based upon creation. If God created the planets, he could have created them with the original atoms having their nuclear spin axes pointing in the same direction. The many magnetic fields of the atoms lining up would be converted within seconds into a large electrical current within the planet, producing the electromagnetic field of the planet. The magnetic field would be strong at creation and would weaken over time. So based on this principle, and the assumption that the planets were all only 6,000 years old, Humphreys predicted the magnetic fields of multiple planets which at the time had not yet been measured. He published his predictions in a 1984 Creation Research Society quarterly paper. Now, since that time, 5 out of his 6 predictions have been fulfilled, while 5 out of 6 predictions made by evolutionary theories have failed miserably.
First, neither you nor apparently D. Russell Humphreys have ever been near an electromagnet. Next, the model starts from a presupposition, and as such is fatally flawed before any data is gathered. Then you fail to tell us what the predictions are, just that 5 of the 6 were found to be correct. In a moment, you're going to talk about the last being dependent on hue horizons. Don't deny it. We'll discuss that one in July. As far as his paper, I'm going to leave that for now, and consult with a couple of people before returning to it in a random rant. For the record, predictions of a magnetically dead body aren't evidence of a less than 6,000-year-old solar system.
We will find out about the 6th prediction in 2015 when the New Horizons spacecraft finally visits Pluto. Spike Pacieris covered the problems that all the planets, moons in our solar system cause when you invoke deep time. In fact, the problem is not that the planets and the moons, but rather men's theories and assumptions of deep time.
It's not our assumptions of deep time that are the problem, it's that we have evidence here on Earth for most of 4.5 billion years, and other objects from space that go back somewhat further. Young Earth creationism is bollocks, and you're trying to rewrite history by doubting the evidence. Even if you're right and the evidence has been misinterpreted, then you're still fucking wrong, as none of this proves your magic sky fairy had anything to do with it. Spike has been proven to be an idiot on several occasions, and this isn't making it any better for him.
That's the problem. If you remove the assumption of billions of years, and the assumption of stellar evolution, there is no problem. These problems are a man-made artifact. An artifact of people rejecting the truth of creation, and therefore having to concoct another explanation for planets, moons, our solar system, etc. Another explanation which simply will not work for the simple reason that it's not true.
You can't just say that's not true and walk away, Booby. You have no evidence of your claim, in favor of God on it. This sorry excuse for a dismissal requires that you first find and supply empirical evidence that there can be gods in the first place, followed by more evidence that the specific god specified in the storybook written by Bronze Age camouflagetors exists, had anything to do with it, or could be fucked to go to the effort instead of usurping the universe made by the Mesopotamian deities and heroes his myth was based on. We're not the ones making the claims now, Booby. You need to do the proving.
In Spike's phenomenal and informative Volume 1 of What You Aren't Being Told About Astronomy,
Spike's a fraud, and we all know that. What we aren't being told about astronomy amounts to the things we don't know yet. Anyone with the math background and a sufficiently high-powered telescope can learn what they need for themselves, with a few terms added to their vocabulary.
Spike detailed the problems caused by Io, as well as Saturn's rings, its moon Titan, and the topic that gets me hungry for Mexican food every time we talk about it, enchiladas. No, it's not a Mexican dish. It's one of Saturn's many moons. Now, everything about Saturn's rings scream that they are young. the lack of space dust on the rings, the braiding of the rings, the fact that over time the ice chunks would homogenize into one size, but yet they are all different sizes.
Now for Saturn, the grading and composition of Saturn's rings, as well as the gaps between them, are the result of a very special force.
Gravity, you fucking retard!
And that force keeps them in that condition. You have all sorts of debris in there, and bits cross in there as the chunks enter into various resonances with all those moons. It keeps them stirred up and the pieces from getting over large.
Everything about the moons screams that they are young.
Enceladus is actually responsible for much of Saturn's E-ring, and is geologically active. For that matter, there is even liquid water under that ice just like its close cousin, Europa.
Enceladus is spraying an incredible geyser of ice, hundreds of kilometers high. How on earth could it do this for millions and millions of years? Short answer, it cannot. Titan has an atmosphere of methane, but sunlight destroys that methane. So the methane simply cannot last for many millions of years.
Titan's hydrosphere is made up of methane in liquid, solid, and gaseous forms. It's not close enough to Sol to break down as vigorously as it would here on Earth, and even then without a clear estimation you don't provide of how much methane might be involved, you can't say that. Besides, you mischaracterize the content of Titan's atmosphere. It is in fact mostly nitrogen, as reported by Cassini.
Forget the billions of years of assumed evolutionary time required for the formation of these planets and moons. Spike had been detailing these problems in lectures since the early 90s, showing that these problems are only problems for the man-made theories invoking deep time. None of them cause problems for a creation and a young Earth. In fact, everything about the solar system smacks of it being young.
Again, you don't get to say that without evidence, and Spike is an attack gerbil. Also, what is an evolutionist? My dictionary doesn't appear to know it.
Not billions of years old. So, these facts actually support a young solar system and the interpretation of biblical creation.
Even if your assertion were true and it's all young, that still doesn't prove you're God, you steaming pile of rancid blubber. This is why you can't get a job at the local burger dude. Well, that and their unending terror that you're going to wipe out the stock for a mid-shift snack.
David Coppage have been citing myriads of problems the planets and moons present for deep time and stellar evolutionary theories for decades.
Booby, Booby, Booby. What have I told you about listening to Kent Hovind? There is no theory about stellar evolution, as evolution explains biodiversity, and nothing else.
Documenting them on his very popular website, Creation Evolution Headlines, started back in 2000. But of course, Coppage had been pointing to short-lived solar system phenomena for many years before he started that website. The long and short of the story is that for decades, creationary scientists
Did you just make up a word?
Have been pointing out the many, many lines of evidence that the solar system is young and cannot be explained by natural processes.
Precisely what lines of evidence would those be, then? If you make a claim, you must then provide your evidence. Do I need to invoke the Hitchens?
Evolutionary theory has failed in both predictions and explanations for the solar system.
I'm going to ignore all further attempts by you to conflate evolution with cosmology or any other theory. If I don't, we're going to be here all day. Stock answer from here on out. Evolution is the theory explaining biodiversity, you fucking retard. You ever heard of fucking biodiversity? Biodiversity. Repeating an assertion doesn't make it true, you fucking loony.
While creationary models fit the facts just fine, and have even made successful predictions to what we would find in the solar system.
Please describe your creationary models. If you can or will not, then you don't get to claim the rest.
Now, just those facts alone should make any scientifically minded person sit up and ask questions and wonder if the solar system was created.
You have yet to describe your facts. If you had, we'd already be asking the questions, and then harrowing your answers to within microns of their little lives. Long story short, Booby, there is a mountain of verifiable evidence already to hand that provides proof that the universe is older than you think it is. Your creation story looks like any one of the other creation myths that persisted in the Middle East long before the time you describe. For a self-proclaimed card-carrying Mensa member, you really are astonishingly ignorant. Or has the bar to entry been dropped that far?
So now this past week, an article came out in Nature website entitled Caught in the Act, written by Maggie McGee. The article acknowledges several of the very real problems evolutionary theory has in explaining various features found in our solar system.
This is a news post, written by a reporter rather than a scientist. In the bit about Saturn's rings, they rightly claim that they don't know, but they've got a test lined up that will test the current hypothesis. Enceladus entry also suggests a testable hypothesis, even if it does seem a tad off. That said, there is evidence of similar activity here on Earth, and there's a test being considered for 2015, and another 2 years later. Io is nearly the same story as Enceladus, and with roughly the same explanation, adding its resonance with Europa and Ganymede. Titan has a couple of different hypotheses as well, and like the others on the list, could have other explanations that don't involve it being 6,000 years old and created by a magic sky fairy. The short answer is that we don't know, and whilst we can imagine and model these phenomena, the actual explanation is currently eluding us. Nothing a bit of new data from objects already out there studying won't at least help. That's the beauty of science, you see. We can say I don't know, actually. Let's check in on it and see if we can't work it out. With your holy book, you can't have new data, because your critter already gave you all you're going to get, and tough luck if the ibex buggerers that took it all down didn't ask the right questions.
Saturn's rings provide multiple, baffling mysteries. Even in the Nature article, McGee goes into detail about the problems with how young the rings appear to be. At most a few 100 million years. That's the maximum age. A far, far cry from several billion years that was expected. The rings are clean, no space dust, which would accumulate and darken the rings over hundreds of millions of years. Furthermore, there is no adequate natural explanation for the rings. Now, some speculate that it was perhaps a comet or comets that were trapped in orbit around Saturn. But this requires odds of astronomical proportions.
You don't get to talk about numbers. You can't even use evolution properly in a sentence.
You realize how hard it is to get something into orbit around a planet and to maintain that orbit? Just ask NASA how difficult it is.
It's easy enough if you know the science behind it, and what forces are acting to any significant degree upon an object in any orbit. Putting it into practice is more difficult in terms of logistics, but we're talking about your vapid appeal to personal incredulity, aren't we? NASA knew the maths for it. It was the logistics that got them behind, and once they worked the logistics problem, that was the end of that.
Do you remember Comet Shoemaker-Levy 9? The comet that was sucked into a brief orbit around Jupiter in 1994, which promptly led to the disintegration of the comet, and the comet itself getting sucked into the planet, resulting in a spectacular explosion on Jupiter that was the size of Earth itself. You don't see comets getting captured in an orbit. You see them impacting planets. How many of you remember the Mars Climate Orbiter? Yeah, the one that crashed onto Mars due to a metric conversion error? Oops. The orbiter had to get to the planet at precisely the right location, speed, and trajectory in order to get into orbit. It didn't make it because it was off just a hair due to a math error. Now this gives you an idea of just how hard it is to capture something in orbit, even with intelligence behind the wheel.
It did not because of the aforementioned programming error. That much error, they should be happy they got to Mars in the first place. The maths work out, and we've many times put things in orbits, so long as the maths were precise enough to accomplish the task. Shoemaker-Levy was predicted to fall into Jupiter ahead of time, and Apophis is predicted to miss Earth by a very small margin in 2028. It's not a question of difficulty, it's a question of precision. That we've put several probes down on Mars and a couple of orbiters that have stayed put without being destroyed makes this argument from you slimy at best, you corpulent toad.
It's a very delicate balancing act, and we should be astonished when NASA does get it right, because it's really, really hard to do. So, now, you have to multiply that balancing act by millions upon millions, as you have many millions of large ice bodies in perfectly balanced orbit around Saturn.
Here you go with the numbers and idiotic probabilities again. You assume that they weren't locally generated objects, which by all accounts they were. Even if Enceladus is not responsible for the vast majority of the debris field, that doesn't obviate moons that may have been crushed by the major moons and Saturn, and yes, even the occasional captured asteroid or comet. The last two are less likely, but there are mechanisms by which these things can be accomplished.
Two rings in the F-ring region are braided. They rotate around each other as they orbit the planet. You have two moons known as the dancing moons orbiting Saturn, one farther out than the other. Every 4 years, they switch places with the other in their orbits.
Because they're orbiting one another while orbiting Saturn. Same thing for the braiding in the F-ring. Two masses close enough together to be gravitationally bound to one another will orbit a common center of mass. That point even has a name. Barycenter.
Everything about Saturn's rings smacks of careful orchestration and youth. Do you really think all of this could continue on for millions and millions of years? No. The rings are just another piece of artwork in the solar system, with the rings themselves being the signature of the artist, the crowning glory of the beautiful planet.
Orchestration? You're going with that? Artwork my ass. The beauty of the universe isn't a whim of art. If it were, then those rings would be in the shape of a pair of tits and a set of open vulva. Show me that, and we'll talk.
McGee then talks about Enceladus and its huge continental eruption of water from its south pole. Yeah, look at the size of it. You can quickly understand why so many scientists, including those who believe in deep time, have been astonished by this. There is no way this geyser could continue like this for millions of years. It must be recent. Not only that, but Enceladus is also giving off a tremendous amount of heat, 10 times what would be predicted if the heat was produced by radioactivity in its core and the moon being stretched and squeezed by the pull of gravity from Saturn. So where is all this heat coming from? One thing can be said: it can't be giving off heat like that for millions and millions of years. So everything about Enceladus speaks of a young age.
From friction, you cherry-picking dolt. We already covered this. Do you need those cherries for the glazing on your morning bucket of donuts or something? It's been hypothesized that we're seeing part of a cyclic event in a lot of these cases, and there are experiments being planned to test this. You haven't looked at the surface data either, as some of it is very old, and other bits newer. If Enceladus is undergoing cyclic volcanism, this would explain the observable facts. Next you're going to go on about Io, which is more or less the same thing.
But then McGee gets to Io, one of Jupiter's moons. A moon which gives off so much heat it leaves Enceladus looking like a match compared to a bonfire. Volcanoes shooting lava at over 300 kilometers an hour and 280 kilometers high. One volcano on Io, named Loki, is more powerful than all of Earth's volcanoes combined. The entire moon is dotted with volcanoes from the incredible heat this moon is putting out. Do you think this moon could continue to pour out so much heat for millions of years? Of course not. And scientists don't think so either. Forget billions of years. Lastly, McGee gets to Titan, a moon of Saturn which has an atmosphere composed primarily of methane. Methane so dense it actually condensed and fell like rain, making streambeds and other landscape features. But sunlight breaks down methane, and there is no known source for the huge volumes of methane on Titan.
Just because you don't know the source doesn't mean your magic sky fairy put it there 6,000 years ago. There are a number of hypotheses for the source, including reservoirs internal to the planet. It takes millions of years to cut rivers and other landscape features, and hydrocarbons are very common in the rocks that are whizzing around the system. This is not evidence for youth in the system. It means that we're short on hard data. Your creation fairy tale is not supported just because scientists haven't worked out the precise mechanism.
So again, we see the admission that there's indications of the moon's youth. Exactly what the creationists and many evolutionists have been saying for decades. YECcy sums it all up nicely in talking about these problems and the proposed solutions to the problems with a naturalistic model. Some such proposals make planetary researchers uncomfortable because it is statistically unlikely that humans would catch any one object engaged in unusual activity, let alone several. And she's absolutely right. The more likely explanation is that it's not unusual activity, simply because there is no deep time. All of these planets and moons are young.
Statistically unlikely isn't impossible, no matter how you want to spin it, you buffet badger. YECcy is a science reporter. The headline refers to the hypothesis that this is exactly the statistically improbable event that it appears to be, rather than some nefarious cover-up of creationism. If you take the current age of the universe compared to conservative estimates of its likely workable lifespan, you'll discover that it's still a developing child. Existing models place that end into the trillions of years, and some even further out.
Not billions of years old. Evolutionary models have failed to fit the facts, whereas the models of a young creation not only fit the facts well, they have even predicted discoveries that were made.
Before you start preaching, I'm going to say this one last time: evolution has nothing to say about cosmology, and even less about your magic sky fairy. Until you can prove your specific imaginary friend, then you need to get your nose out of the trough and into a book. At this point, he spends a couple of minutes preaching before going to several woo commercials. He comes back thereafter to jam his nose into the feed, air mailbag, complete with a video joke. If you people ask, we can go into the mailbag for this bullshit in another video. The first couple are on geology, and if Wildwood Claire hasn't already covered it, then I'll let her have a go first. This week's shout-out: TheLivingDinosaur is unusual, as he doesn't do cosmology as Ian has done in this particularly malodorous attempt at a hit piece, but biology. He did, however, beat Ian soundly about the head and shoulder with his own inimical style, and whilst my video is a mere shadow of the drubbing he dishes out so well, I'm still learning the trade. This man is the master, and is both criminally underwatched and undersubbed. Maybe together we can get this fine YouTuber motivated to give us another Holy Hallucinations video. It seems such a waste to end it on number 39. Go check out his material, laugh, and then rate, comment, and subscribe. He just needs to know that we like a good laugh, and he delivers with grace and skill every time. If you like what we're doing here, don't forget to click all the magic buttons, and leave a comment or 30. We do enjoy getting feedback on the work, and having discussions for and against the points raised and the snarking level. I'm on vacation next week, but Kage should be here, or possibly one of the others. After this many videos, I need a break, and you are all probably sick of looking at me anyway. If anything, some of them are stranger than I am.
Tabby. You're still on the schedule until after Spirit Science next month.
Fuck you, Shinma. I took Booby because you insisted we needed a creationist next. You owe me big time, and if you think I'm going to let you off now, you're almost as deranged as he is.
Fine, I'll think of something. Fuck. But you do the random rants until Wednesday.
Who's doing them after that?
It'll take me that long to get a volunteer.
Are we still recording?